Well, welcome to another edition of the podcast. This week we head off to the UK to catch up with Stuart Fitch. He is the Director of Flight Operations, which I know, that sounds pretty special title. We will actually find out what it all means as Stu joins us. Hey, welcome to the podcast, Stu.
Thanks, Wayne.
Now, I've got to tell you, my older brother, his name is also Stuart, also spelt with a UA like you. But we used to call him Stewie growing up. Like that was his kind of, his informal name in the family. Do you have any sort of nickname or an informal name that friends or family call you either now or, when you were younger?
This probably isn't the time to admit that, is it, when it's going to be listened to by everybody? But no is the answer. I mean, I was called Fitch at school, obviously. But no, Stu is pretty much what everyone always called me. I remember the first person to ever call me Stu, a lady called Jackie in my church when I was a kid, and it's just stuck. So everyone calls me Stu. I'm only Stuart if I'm in trouble, but I guess that's probably the same with your brother as well, I guess.
Absolutely, and I probably could say that he was called Stuart a lot, but let's move on. I don't want to get him or myself into trouble. But let's talk about you and aviation. Obviously, we'll talk about your current role and what that means and what it sort of looks like. But I think you were just a teenager when you got involved in aviation and flew solo, I think, on your 17th birthday. So take us back to where did the love of all things aviation, where did it sort of start for you?
You're right. I flew solo on my 17th birthday so I could fly an aeroplane before I could drive a car. I was at school and one of my mates joined the Air Cadets, it's kind of like a junior Air Force kind of thing that they have here in the UK. Just went along, a bit like Scouts, that kind of thing. Thought, give it a go, see what it's like. And then from that, thought, I kind of like this. It just fitted with me. So I was fortunate enough to join the Air Force and flew in the Air Force for 13 years. And the reason I was solo on my 17th birthday was because I'd applied for and got a scholarship from the Air Force to learn to fly. So they paid for 30 hours in a 152, no strings attached. I'm pretty sure they don't do it anymore because it costs a reasonable amount of money if you do that with everybody. And then so did that, thought, this is really cool, like this. And then when you're 19, you think you can do anything you want. So saw no reason why I wouldn't be able to join the Air Force. Only later do you realize the chances of it, like 1 in 100 people or something like that who apply actually make it. So been involved in aviation ever since.
And I think it's roughly 20 years ago, or maybe this year it's 20 years that you joined MAF. So what was that journey from the Royal Air Force to a missions organisation who's at its heart is an aviation organisation?
I joined the Air Force expecting that would be my career. Very definitely, I haven't got time for it now, but I have absolutely no doubt it was God's calling. My mum and dad had always sort of supported mission, got the various magazines from different organisations, including the MAF one. So I kind of was aware of what MAF did. And then as I went on in my Air Force career, started to know a bit more about what MAF did, started supporting it. And then I met my wife, Ruth, and she's a Mish kid. In fact, she's third generation missionary now. Her grandparents and both parents were missionaries in various parts of the world. And sort of fairly quickly, the conversation led to, what are you going to do with your life? She's a medical doctor and wanted to go back to the mission field to go overseas to practice medicine. So that sort of all joined together, and prayed about it a lot and felt like every time we pushed on the door opened, and we sort of progressed one step further through the journey that's brought us to MAF. And after 20 years, still here, still as passionate, hopefully more passionate actually, about the mission that we have and what we do, and being able to combine our professional expertise that we have in aviation and a love of Jesus, and wanting the world to know who he is and what it means to have a relationship with him.
So do you remember first landing in Nairobi in Kenya, which I think is where you first began your MAF journey? Do you remember kind of hitting the ground there and what you thought, different sounds, different smells, all of that kind of thing?
I remember the flight, on Kenya Airways over, and landing, being met by who are then our neighbours, Mike and Julia Black, and being taken to our compound and walking into the house. So I remember, things like that.
Yeah.
They're some of the more significant moments in your life. And I've tried to do that sometimes. There's times in my life when I'm doing something, I think I must make sure I remember this, try and take a little snapshot in your head. And if it's a cool place to be, or you're doing something with your family or something, you just think, I've got to remember this, because this is one of those moments. I definitely remember that day. And it was more significant actually because we were being followed by Radio 4 journalists, BBC journalists from the UK. They were doing a show about math, and we happened to just be at the right point at the right time. And then they came and interviewed us before we left, and came and interviewed us when we got to Nairobi. So I remember that as well, because Ruth was like, "Oh, she's following us everywhere. I can't believe she's on the airplane with us as well."
Oh, you were pioneers when it comes to like reality TV. Like, seems everybody's got a camera crew following them these days. But the Fitch family, you were the pioneers.
Well, it was a lady with a microphone. Fortunately there was no camera around. I don't think I have a face for TV. Let's put it that way. So yeah, I'm never that comfortable in front of a camera.
Yeah. Did you ever kind of like in that first step, or those first sort of days or weeks, as part of MAF there on the ground in Kenya, were there ever moments where you had questions in terms of like, were you supposed to be doing this, or was the call of God just that strong that you went, this is where we're supposed to be, we know this is where we're supposed to be, we're in his will, we're following the path and the plan that he has for us, and there was kind of no like looking back?
No, I don't think there was. And that I don't mean that to sound glib in any way, because it that makes it sound as though it's easy, and it really wasn't. One of the things that we try really hard as an organization to do is to make sure that people's calling is really sound, and they are doing exactly what you just said, that they're in God's will. I'm absolutely convinced that no matter where you are, if you're in the middle of God's will, there's no better place to be. We're all on a different path with our Heavenly Father and where he wants us to be, but being in the middle of that is where we need to be, whatever the season of our life is. We arrived in Kenya, and we had a very good friend of ours got really sick back in the UK very quickly, one of Ruth's best friends. That was not easy, and I was really homesick, which took me completely by surprise. I traveled a lot. I'd been away with the military. I'd lived overseas with the military. Never had it before, but for the first 2 or 3 months, just felt really homesick. But from the flying perspective, I was reasonably confident with the training that we had that I could make it.
Well, let's talk about training, because I think one of your first roles was as a training captain. So can you kind of explain to people like myself who aren't pilots but love flying, like what actually does a training captain, what does it actually, that role entail?
Well, I mean, the basic of the role is working pretty much as a flight instructor. So it's teaching people how to fly, but it's much more than that. It's not just about teaching. It's about enabling the student or the trainee that you're working with to learn, to help them achieve the level of competence that either they or we require, helping them to develop themselves as well, because it's not just a technical skill that we're teaching people. You're actually, in some ways, I wouldn't go as far as say you're teaching them life skills, but you're certainly teaching them a lot more than just how to make an aeroplane go up and down, left and right, faster and slower. You're teaching them how to manage the aeroplane, how to manage the whole environment within which they're working. So, looking at threat and error management, leadership and teamwork, how you apply the knowledge that you've learned theoretically and apply that and correlate that into novel situations, because that's one of the key things with what we do with aeroplanes. The situations in which we fly are so diverse across the world that we really concentrate on helping the pilots that we fly with to learn key principles and key concepts that you can then extrapolate or correlate into the environments in which you're working. Because every day pilots will come up against a novel situation that we just don't have the time or the capacity to train for every single eventuality. And what we're looking at is that flexibility, that the guys can take the key principles that we've taught and apply them in the situations that they come into. And all the guys that I work with within MAF who are trainers, we're really passionate about that.
So what drives that passion in terms of, training and then, investing into people now that are, part of your team?
Some of it's a personality thing, to be honest, Wayne. I've been a flight instructor a long time. What I was taught how to be a flight instructor in the Air Force, and I've taught on and off for years. And for me, I get a real kick out of that, about taking somebody and walking with them on that process, on that journey. Sorry, that's the word, you're not supposed to use, to get them to where you really want them to be. And when I was in the Air Force and instructing, you get the guys to that light bulb moment. And it's the same, all the instructing I've done, actually, that light bulb moment, when someone gets it, you go, aha, there you go. When you can take them to that point, personally, I get a real kick out of that. And I know for the guys who are in the team that I work with, all the flight instructors and the trainers across the organization, that's why they do it as well. It's about the people, and it's about then enabling them and empowering them to get to come out and do what we do as an organization. I'm talking in MAC context, obviously. I know a few teachers, and I know that's the same for them. It's more than just a job. There's a bit of a calling and a bit of a vocation that goes with it as well.
How do you approach someone that you're trying to train or someone that you're trying to teach, but it seems to just be taking so long to get to that light bulb moment, that you just touched on? Like, do you have any sort of experience or any techniques that you've gathered across many, many years of training that might actually help someone who's listening to the podcast?
I think empathy is really important. Putting yourself in the other person's shoes and trying to understand where they're coming from as they're learning. So understanding to know what their background is, what their expectations are, what their professional background, and also what their educational background is. What's their particular learning style. All of us appreciate and learn in different ways. I'm a doer learner, so yes, I'm happy to sit and read a book, but when I can actually sit there and touch an airplane or do it, then it sinks in, and then it really so for me, learning from mistakes is really important. In fact, I think for me, well, and I think for many of us, that's absolutely critical. Is never, as a trainer, is never be afraid to let somebody make a mistake, because often they'll learn much more. So if people are struggling to reach that light bulb moment, as a trainer, part of it is having that approach where it's about the individual, it's about the person. So working with them and just trying to puzzle and work out. And for me, so that's part of the joy and the challenge of it, is what is it that I can do with this individual just to get them to that point, aha, and then you can see it goes. And sometimes you have to try 2 or 3 or 4 different ways of doing that with the individual, but it also doesn't help to ask someone else. Sometimes other trainers have got a different approach to it, a different way of explaining something or expressing something. That helps as well. So if you're getting stuck, ask for help.
Yeah, no, that's some good advice. Hey, what's the most memorable mistake you've made and learnt from? Because I agree with you. Mistakes, I think, can be a great learning ground as long as you actually learn from them. And some people just seem to make the same mistake again and again, but there's no learning that takes place.
Oh, that's a great question. There's a couple of times, particularly in my flying career, where I've done something and it's a kind of not a eureka moment, but it's like that's kind of, where you almost like you turn 90 degrees and think, right, I've really got to learn that and go forward. When I was learning to be a flight instructor in the Air Force, so I've been flying for 3, 4, 5 years, something like that. So I've been going for quite a long time, and yeah, I could fly an aeroplane. And then I remember flying with a really experienced flight instructor, and I'd done something to do with, we were shutting engines down and relighting them, and I'd done something. After the event, he said to me, you didn't do this. And I tried to justify why I'd done what I'd done, even though it wasn't the correct thing. I was thinking, well, this was my thinking and this is why I'm doing it. And he just sat there and he said to me, Stu, you did it wrong. I'm sure you had reasons for doing it, but just accept that you didn't do it the right way. And that was a bit of a sobering thing for me. But I thought afterwards, and I sulked a little bit, but afterwards I thought, you know what, he's absolutely right. I've got to take ownership of what I did and what I did wrong. And it wasn't a big deal, but I did the procedures incorrectly. So for me, that was a bit of a light bulb moment for me, where I just thought, yeah, I've got to accept sometimes, not answer back, and just accept that sometimes other people know better than me. Maybe that's not quite a mistake, but it's certainly a learning experience for me.
So speaking of learning, you mentioned that you're a hands-on learner. You like to get in there and you like to do it. So how do you then approach learning that isn't like that? Or maybe, people in your team who have to do some of the recurrency learning and training, on Elevate, the things that they have to do, to stay current and those kind of things, but they really don't thrive in that environment. Doing the e-learning is just not their thing. Like, how do you encourage them to embrace it and sort of get the most out of it, even though it's not necessarily their preferred way of learning?
The approach that we've always tried to take with e-learning is it's, part of the 70-20-10 rule. I don't know if people are familiar with that only 10% of your learning actually comes from that theoretical part of it, which is often what the e-learning is about. So something like e-learning, that's not the be all and end all. That's the introduction, that's the start. What we actually want to see is you applying that knowledge that you've learned. So start with that foundation with the e-learning, sit there and learn through it, take it. But it's critical that what you're then able to do is work with your trainer or with your mentor or your coach and be able to then apply what you've learned into the real context. So, there shouldn't be any training that we do that's just ticking a box. It feels like it sometimes, but, we should only be asking people to do training that helps to either help them do their job better, helps them work with customers better, helps them work with their colleagues better. So it's about helping them. I think personally, it's helping your people that you're working with to understand that the e-learning is just the first step. And actually then there's a number of steps further on than that you then need to go and work proactively to apply that knowledge in the place that you're working and to help and understand why it's benefiting you.
Now, Stu, you've been involved in aviation for 35 plus years. I don't know the exact number, but I'm going to say it's around about that ballpark. I wonder for you personally...
It's very kind of you, Wayne.
Are you still learning every day or every week? Do you feel like you're still learning?
Oh, 100%. I would say every day. There's always something. For those of you who've done Clifton Strengths Finders, my number one strength is learner. So I will generally have 3 or 4 books on the go at one point. I'm reading a novel. We're probably trying to read a Christian book. I'm also trying to read non-fiction. I'm also trying to read something that helps me to learn or I'm interested in. There's a downside to that, obviously, that I can go down rabbit holes very quickly. But no, I'm always trying to learn new things. And the thing I struggle with is having the time to reflect on what I've learned. And that thing we were talking about, application, of actually having the chance to think and say, right, let's be intentional about that training that I've done. How can I use that to benefit me further?
And just finally, Stu, what's the best tip or the best piece of advice that either you've received or you can share with us on the podcast today when it comes to someone's, professional development, someone just improving themselves, either personally and or professionally?
I would love it if we can get to a place where one of the cultures that we have within the organization is that people are inquisitive, that they're asking questions, that they want to find out, they want to learn more, they want to get to a place where actually they are taking ownership of their own learning and development. I always encourage the guys that I work with to say, what I want you to do is to sit down and decide, where do you want to be? What do you want to be doing? What do you want to learn? What new skills can you be taking on board that are going to help you do your job better, help you work with your colleagues better. So I think my one tip would be, to be inquisitive, to keep looking at what's out there. It's very easy, I think, sometimes, in the busyness of life, we sort of get not stuck in a rut, but we just sort of get used to the normal. Just dream a little bit. I'm not always very good at that, but be willing to take a couple of risks as well and not be afraid to make mistakes.
Dream a little bit. I love that. What a great way to finish. But Stu, I have so many more things I wanted to talk to you about. Sadly, we're out of time. We might have to get you back on the podcast maybe in a few months and we continue the chat. Does that sound all right?
You know where I am, Wayne. Always happy to chat. That'd be great. Thank you.
Stuart Fitch, Director of Flight Operations, has been our guest on the podcast today. And don't forget, you can subscribe. You can listen to some other episodes. And if you've got a learning story and you want to share it on the podcast, please get in touch with us here at MAF and we'd love to share that.